Okay. So, hi everyone. Welcome to, as I said in the intro video for week three, this is week three where we're going to be talking about chapters 3 and 4 from our textbook. And so I am trying something a little bit different today, at least as far as like taking the notes and things like that. So please bear with me as I test out a whole new thing. But on top of that, I just want to make note and identify. So we are going to talk about the chapters, and this week's chapters. If you remember all the way back at the beginning of the class, I said that you know part of the criminal justice, specifically juvenile justice, is equal parts criminal justice, equal parts social work. So this is a very social work, philosophy, psychology heavy chapter section. So bear with me. If that's not your area of interest, I urge you to reconsider where you place juvenile justice in your overall repertoire of things. So, anyway, so we are going to talk about simply chapter 3 and 4, which, like I said, we'll talk about several different things. And so, because this is covering a lot of content, we'll just kind of go through and take breaks where there's logical points. Anyway, so one of the big things that chapter 3 in particular talks about is they break down the issue of choice theory. Oof. And they also talk about, choice theory and trait theory. Oops. As I said, I'm trying something new. My partner was a animator, digital animation, so they have a writing board. I'm trying that to see if I can get better writing, so bear with me. So, our chapter starts with breaking things down into choice theory and trait theory, and I don't like the way that A is looking, so I want to get all the way over here. There we go. Okay. So, these are the two of the big areas in which our authors break down how we can view delinquency in individuals. And so these are the two main areas, and I want to emphasize, they're pretty straightforward in what they're saying. So hopefully this is pretty straightforward, but choice theory is that it's conscientious. Let's see. Oh gosh, I don't even know how to spell conscientious right. You know what? I'm just not going to write conscientious. What I will say, though, is choice theory is all about choices, whereas trait theory is all biology. And so we'll talk more about that as we go through, but that is the basic breakdown. Choice theory suggests that juvenile offenders are rational decision makers who choose to engage. So the idea behind the concept of choice theory is an individual chooses the life of crime. They choose to participate. Whereas trait theory argues that biological markers, as well as possibly social markers, these things influence an individual, and these are the things that lead to juvenile delinquents. And so that's why I say it's really the difference between choice, or another word is, or word I'd add to this is freedom. You have the freedom to choose things. One thing that is mentioned early on in this chapter is the concept of free will. If you're not familiar with free will, it's that everyone has the choice to do whatever the heck they want because you have that free will. But and excuse me for using a for, but the idea of trait theory is that it's decided for you. And so, one thing that I just kind of wanted to bring up as a potential discussion question for a midterm exam is in thinking about trait theory, our author says that delinquent youth are not really rational decision makers, but troubled adolescents driven by uncontrollable personal problems, such as hyperactivity, low intelligence, biochemical imbalance, or genetic defects. Then I urge you to think about what impact does this understanding have on ways to treat autism spectrum disorder individuals, bipolar, or any neurodivergent individuals within the criminal justice system as a whole. If we take trait theory at its base level, does this mean that we have to treat them differently? Does it mean that we should be treating them differently? Or how do we approach that? And so, potential minor trigger warning for later on in this chapter. One thing that has to do with choice and trait theory, something that comes up is why some individuals choose to do things. And we do talk about school shootings a little bit. So if that's a sensitive subject area for you, I'll try to remind you before we touch on it, but just want to give you the heads up that we are going to talk about that. And so, excuse me. Like I said, I'm not back to perfect yet. But so when we're talking about choice theory, there's quite a few psychologists. I'm going to just mention a couple of them real quickly. They're kind of like the big ones. Oh, gosh. I don't know. I looked away for half a second. All right, give me 1 second to fix my little boo-boo here. Okay, so we have Cesar Becerra and Jeremy Bentham. These two were like the founders, the early era of free will choice kind of theory. Particularly, what they put forward is known as classical theory, at least at the time. But now we know it more as rational choice theory. The entire premise of choice theory really is just you choose to engage in it. People weigh the pros and cons. So the reason why I say this is important is because this is part of the this is part of the theories of punishment for criminal justice. It's the idea that you weigh the cost of your crime and then act. So, to Bentham and Becerra, the idea was everyone thinks about it. It's you weigh the cost and then you make a decision. Do you commit a crime because you know you'll get away with it? Do you commit a crime because you know it pays well? Because the punishment's not strict? Because pick your answer. Becerra and Bentham say you chose this, you thought about it, you weighed those costs, and you said, yeah, this is definitely fine. And so even our author brings in drug dealers may seem rational. Other behaviors at first glance seem irrational, like vandalism and random violence. But delinquents, kids, graffiti houses they believe they're going to get away with, or the person's not going to really punish them. Like, we make these decisions. So there is some potential credence to this, or some potential support and reasoning behind it. And so it is hard to, and our book does briefly talk about this, but choosing a delinquent act, a delinquent choosing to commit a delinquent act is a complex and complicated thing. And we'll talk about that a little bit tonight or today or this afternoon, this evening, whenever it is that you're watching this. There's a lot. There's a lot of potential. And the unfortunate answer, and I can tell you this right now, there is no one answer. This is not a easy, I can just fill in the blanks. This is a complex, difficult problem. And so what we find in general, and this is regardless of choice theory or trait theory, that there are several factors that play into decisions to be a delinquent or commit a delinquent act. So like there is logic to it, unfortunately. So one thing that comes up is encouraging delinquency. What are things that potentially encourage delinquency? So things that encourage delinquency are several. And I'm just going to start with the first one our text talks about because it's important. Okay, so the first thing is economic need or opportunity. And this is the ever classic, tend to be familiar with this concept that the reason someone commits a crime is because they are doing it because they need the money, they're hungry, they need these kinds of things. So there is that idea, but it's also to be noted that, opportunity presents itself. If you see someone leave a bunch of money unattended and they walk away, the little voice in your head goes, yeah, you should steal it. And then usually your conscience says, no, I shouldn't. That's illegal. Like, encouraging delinquency tends to be need and opportunity. They tend to both be involved, but it can be one or the other. Related to economic need, and this is an interesting one, is sometimes delinquent activity is for problem solving. How do you get out of a bad situation? How do you get out of a gang, bad housing situation, abusive parent? Like, how do you get out of it? Well, you commit a crime. You get out of the situation. So problem solving can do that. And if we think about economic need as a problem solving thing, well, yeah, how do I get out of this area? Well, I steal something so I can afford it. This is something, the other one that I want to talk about really, and this is something that's related to a later thing where it's for street credit, but maintaining respect. That's a big factor in delinquency, is this idea that you're part of a culture that does participate in these kind of delinquent behaviors. And so when you're in those situations, you want to maintain that respect. So you have to continue to commit some kind of crime. You have to do some kind of delinquent behavior to maintain that respect of, you are from the street. You are from this area. And this one, I get it. But yeah, some individuals do things because of the thrill, because of the excitement it brings. And this is definitely something that I'll say is a, excuse me, a real problem in anything for that matter. Any kind of illegal activity or potentially illegal activity. There's some kind of appeal with doing something you're not supposed to do. And so it tends to be something that people continuously do and are encouraged to do. Hence why it's something that is encouraging of delinquency. But for every encouraging, there is discouraging. It's always a weird word for me to write. I apologize now. Discouraging. So if you noticed, I kind of like hesitated. It's because it's hard for me to think about how to spell it. Anyway, the obvious first thing that's helpful in discouraging delinquency is parental monitoring. Sorry. I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but it's hard for me to talk and write at the same time because I'm thinking about how to spell the words. So apologies when I pause to write. But one way in which we can see and have proven that these activities discourage delinquent behaviors is an increase in parental monitoring when parents or peers or, well, peers is a different thing, but when parents or guardians or things like that, if they are engaged and involved in the potential delinquent's life and they're watching for these things, that supervision tends to decrease the likelihood of an individual being delinquent. Now, of course, there's always exceptions. I'm sure some people who had like really strict and overprotective parents might have acted out a little bit more. It is a possibility. So this seems really obvious, but if we limit the opportunity, it's going to discourage delinquency. If you remove the potential risks and things involved that encourage delinquency, if you limit those opportunities to actually do it, and these are through things like this could be something like an after school program. This can be a sport. There's going to be like several possible things. If you limit their opportunity to engage in the delinquent behaviors, it will, in fact, discourage delinquent behavior. And so, one thing that choice theory holds, is that we hold our own needs over others, but there is a real idea, and what social concern essentially breaks down into is belonging. If an individual wants to belong to society, wants to belong to a certain group, they will act a certain way. They will engage a certain way. And so by discouraging delinquency, if we have a social concern, an individual who's potentially a delinquent wants to be part of the normal society and that social norm, that social concern will actually have an impact on discouraging said delinquency. So it is important to note that there is that external factor as well that can play into this, but it's important to note that the social concern is a more personal approach and it's a harder one to address in this kind of sense, the way we're talking. But of course, with all this, our textbook does talk about something that relates directly to this opportunity and everything, and that is in particular sorry, again, it's hard for me to write and talk. Routines activity theory. So there is this issue that the motivation to commit some kind of delinquent act tends to be constant. Well, why is that? And that it comes down to it's part of the normal routine, the daily task and the daily operations of an individual's life. And so if there is a motivation for the offender, like they're unsupervised or they're unemployed or addicted, and there are suitable targets like, low income areas, expensive cars, expensive jewelry, easily stealable stuff, and there's no real like guardians, capable guardians, so police officers, security systems, etc. The chances of your delinquency is high. So, to sum it all up, delinquency is part of daily life, and several factors determine delinquency. I'm going to say delinquent act. Okay. So that's really what I'm trying to get at. So it's important to note that this is just one of several ideas. I do want to touch briefly on one thing that's related to this, but is not, and that is with all this talk about, with all these ideas surrounding, we're talking about theories, specifically, we're talking choice theories of delinquency and juveniles engaging in delinquent behavior. Something that we need to talk about, but we don't always talk about, is deterrence. And so I know we've mentioned it before in other classes and in this class, but deterrence is any activity or act or engagement or whatever it may be that is meant to turn away, to deter an illegal activity or any kind of a negative trait activity. And so, I forgot I was writing a G, so sorry about that. There is general deterrence, there's specific deterrence. Excuse me. And there is a difference. Apologies. My stomach is not right. General deterrence is the basic understanding that punishment prevents crime. This idea that the threat of punishment or punishment itself will deter an individual from committing said crime. We've talked about this before. The data as far as this kind of system of deterrence is spotty at best. There are times where it shows that it works, and there's times that it shows it doesn't work. So general deterrence is a more difficult thing to talk about, but specific deterrence, that's what I want to really focus on. Specific deterrence is closer to this is where we have the punishment fits crime. So in general, the general is the concept, or the punishment itself just in general is that, but the punishment fits the crime. And specific tends to be related to repeat offenders. So people that have already done it, you want to have a punishment that is going to encourage them not to. But something in general about deterrence and why I wanted to bring it up here is um, so within the juvenile system, the data suggests that strict punishment doesn't really work. And our authors put forward a short list of specific potential reasons why it doesn't work, and that's kind of the unifying factor of this entire system itself, and why we have classes and need to discuss juvenile justice is because it is a different system. Why doesn't punishment and harsh, very particular, strict punishment, why doesn't it work? The idea behind any kind of deterrence is the whole idea behind deterrence, both general and specific, is rational mind says no. But if we're looking at juvenile delinquents as being choice driven, they're making that choice. The rational mind says no. Well, then why doesn't strict punishment, why doesn't this idea of deterrence work? Why isn't it working? And so some of the things are, just to name a few, one thing is it breeds defiance. If you've ever had a teenager or any kind of child that fights back with everything you say, they're very defiant. Yeah, that tends to be an issue with the criminal justice system as well. Perhaps my favorite, and we will touch on this a little bit later as well. Stigma surrounding juveniles with a record tends to set them up for failure. They tend to not be able to get an education, get a better job. They tend to be forced into a life of crime. So there's a stigma behind that label, and that leads to other issues. Perhaps one of my favorite, the concept that lightning doesn't strike the same place twice. Just 'cause if you got caught once means the next time you won't get caught, that kind of thing. And then, of course, as we get better understanding of psychology and the human mind, this is the emotional damage. To cite a meme, one of the other things that why deterrence doesn't really work with juveniles is because they are developing mind. They're not fully formed, and so if something negative happens at this point in their development, there can be psychological problems. There can be some level of emotional damage that will affect them for the rest of their lives and potentially lead them to be more criminal and go down a further road. And that's kind of, if you remember way back at the beginning of the class, not this particular lesson, but the class itself, the whole point of juvenile system is to be rehabilitative. That's the goal. If this is the goal, if they're causing psychological problems and emotional damage to individuals where they will then become repeat offenders, isn't that against the message of rehabilitation? And so perhaps, excuse me again, one of my favorite questions that our textbook asks, in particular as a section or a subsection header, is can deterrence be, or can delinquency be deterred? And as I've said before, I don't think that there's any direct, straight answers with the juvenile system as a whole. There's a lot of questions to be asked. There's a lot of uneasiness with this. So, yeah, I think we've talked for like 20 to 30 minutes now. So we'll take a break here. We'll end this video, and then we will pick up with the next one. And yeah, I'll see you all soon.